All right. So, you ready to dive in today? We've got a mountain of case studies to unpack.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm excited to dig into these, especially those stories from the trenches.
Yeah, from places like Instagram, Shopify, Wix, you name it, we've got it.
And what I'm really seeing in these is it's not just theory, it's how these companies tackled real-world challenges with sometimes millions of users on the line.
Yeah, and the first thing that jumps out, at least for me, is the emphasis on performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not just a nice to have, it's make or break, right?
It's essential for...
Take Instagram, for example.
Yeah.
All about speed. But it's, I don't know, it's more nuanced than just making things load fast, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their challenge was making Instagram feel fast.
Yeah.
Especially with all those images.
Right, right.
They found that prefetching certain resources was key, particularly those JavaScript files.
Yeah.
By kind of preloading what users were going to need next.
Yeah.
They significantly improved that perceived speed.
You know, so it's not just about, like, preloading everything, it's about being more strategic.
Absolutely, yeah. They experimented a lot and found that prioritizing resources in the, what they call the critical user path, basically what you see first.
Yeah.
That's where the biggest improvements were. One interesting thing they found was this technique called early flush. It's actually pushing resources to the browser.
Wow.
Before it even asks for them. Like, imagine if you could start downloading a movie before you hit play.
That's wild. Okay, so they're one step ahead. Speaking of user experience, Shopify, right? Yeah. They had this whole user-centric approach to performance. What's that about?
So it's not just raw speed for them. It's about prioritizing what the user sees first.
Gotcha.
They realized that delaying things that weren't essential, like fancy animations, actually created a smoother experience.
So it's about trade-offs then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they measured success not just in milliseconds, but by how engaged users were.
Smart.
And their use of skeletons was genius.
Yeah.
You know, those blank placeholders while content loads.
Oh, yeah. Like, hold on, something cool's coming.
Right. Instead of just a blank screen.
Way better. This next one is fascinating. Smashing Magazine, right? They discovered that where you are in the world can actually make or break your performance scores.
Yeah, your core web vitals.
Tell me more about this India connection.
So they found a lot of their traffic, especially for older articles, was coming from India, and internet speeds there. It's a different story.
Right.
Than, say, the U.S. or Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And their site was being penalized because those scores, they use a global average.
So even if your site is blazing fast in some places,
it can be dragged down.
That's rough. So what did they do?
Clever solution. They used a browser feature where users can say they prefer reduced data usage.
Okay.
They detect that and serve lighter content.
So everyone wins.
Exactly. No sacrificing quality, just smarter delivery.
I love it. Shows how important it is to know your audience. Now, accessibility, this was huge EE in these case studies.
Huge, yeah. It has to be.
Wix, they really impressed me with their error messages.
Oh, yeah. Error messages, that's an interesting one.
Right. You wouldn't think it matters, but...
It's crucial, especially for users with disabilities. Yeah. They got rid of the jargon and made them human.
Okay, so less error code doom, more, oops, something went wrong, here's how to fix it.
Exactly. Empathetic, helpful, and they even created an internal error message guild to keep it consistent.
No way. A guild for error messages, that's dedication. What about LinkedIn? They're doing automated accessibility testing, right?
Yeah, full-on integration. They're catching issues before they even reach users.
So like a robot accessibility expert?
Kinda. They use tools like Dickus AxeCore.
Okay.
Built right into their testing at every stage.
That's amazing. So it's not an afterthought, it's part of the process.
Exactly. Now, we've talked about speed, accessibility.
Right.
But what about the people building the web?
Good developers, right. Developer experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And these case studies, they're full of ideas for making developers' lives better.
I like the sound of that. Less frustration, more coding joy.
Exactly. Let's start with Epidec. They get it. A powerful API isn't enough.
Okay.
It has to be a joy to use.
So it's about the whole experience, not just the tech itself.
Exactly. Clear documentation, lots of examples, top-notch security.
So developers feel supported, like they can trust the API.
Exactly. Now, Facebook, they're known for bold moves.
For sure.
And the radical rewrite, that was huge.
Their whole tech stack gone, right? Why'd they do that?
They wanted to be faster, more responsive, more like a native app.
Okay.
Their old tech just couldn't keep up. And it was holding back the developers, too.
So it was a clean slate. What did they switch to?
React and Relay, which is a GraphQL client.
Big changes. And this wasn't a quick fix, right?
Oh, no. This took years.
Yeah.
But the results, definitely worth it.
So Facebook.com, faster, smoother, and happier developers.
A win-win-win. Now, speaking of makeovers, Notion's marketing site.
Oh, yeah, what'd they do?
They started with their main app, which made sense at the time.
Right.
But as they grew, it just wasn't working. So they migrated to Next.js.
Next.js, okay. And how'd that go? Smooth sailing or?
It had its moments, like any big migration. But they were smart.
Okay.
They did it incrementally, step by step.
So no rushing in blindly.
No way. They planned it out, documented everything.
Pros. So what were the big wins?
Performance skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Their developers were happier.
Yeah.
And the brand experience.
Yeah.
Way more consistent.
A triple threat. Okay, one last thing before we move on. This monorepo thing keeps popping up.
Ah, yes, the monorepo. Ready to dive into that world?
I am, but first explain it like I'm new here.
So imagine instead of having separate repositories for everything, you have one giant one for your whole project.
Okay, so everything in one place. Sounds convenient, but also kind of scary.
It can be. Managing all that code can be a beast.
Right.
But many companies are finding the benefits outweigh the risks.
Like who? Give me some examples.
Think Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Uber. Even smaller companies are seeing success.
Interesting.
And luckily for us, we've got two great case studies, Zuver and Bloomberg.
All right, you've got my attention. Let's talk about those after a quick break. Stay tuned.
All right, so monorepos. Two very different companies, two very different monorepo stories. Where do we even begin?
Well, it's fascinating, right? Because it shows there's no one-size-fits-all here.
Right.
Each company kind of has to find their own way. Let's start with Zuver. They actually started with a multi-repo setup, right?
They did, yeah. Two separate repositories, one for their main site, one for their UI components.
And that's where things went south.
Well, imagine constantly copying and pasting code between those.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. Recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Inconsistent code, headaches. It just wasn't scalable.
So what were the big pain points that pushed them over to the monorepo side?
Code duplication was huge. And then trying to keep track of bug fixes.
Right.
Across multiple repositories. Forget it.
Yeah, version control nightmares.
Exactly. And then dependency management, keeping the coding style consistent.
It's amazing how these things snowball.
It's like a domino effect.
So they finally decided, okay, monorepo, let's do this. Did they jump in head first or?
They were actually very measured. They didn't just blindly follow the hype.
Okay, good.
They really assessed the pros and cons, explored different tools.
Due diligence.
Exactly. And they documented the whole process.
Yeah.
Which is great because others can learn from that.
Yeah, because we've all been in those situations where it's like, why did we do this?
Right. And having that documentation, it's invaluable.
So monorepo, did it solve all their problems?
In many ways, yes. Having all the code in one place, it just simplified things.
Okay.
Dependency management was easier, code was more consistent, even onboarding new devs was smoother.
So happier devs, more efficient workflow, sounds like a win.
Definitely. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, of course.
No, some bumps.
A few. Build times, for one. When you have that much code, it takes longer to build.
Makes sense. How'd they handle that?
They had to get creative with their build process, optimize it for a larger code base.
So more than just switching to a monorepo, it's about adapting your whole workflow.
Exactly. And their deployment process, that had to change too.
It's a whole mindset shift.
Absolutely. Collaboration becomes key. Everyone owns the code base.
Okay, now let's talk Bloomberg. They're on another level.
Yeah, they're dealing with a whole other beast.
We're talking thousands of developers, right?
Over 2,000 software engineers.
Yeah.
And their code base, massive.
Yeah.
50 million lines of JavaScript. At least.
50 million. I can't even imagine.
And they decided to go all in with TypeScript.
Bold move. I'm impressed, but also a little scared for them.
Right. It was a huge undertaking, but they learned a lot. And their experience, it's valuable for anyone working at that scale.
So what were their secrets? How did they make it work?
They had some guiding principles. First, embrace TypeScript's strictness.
Okay, so catch those errors early.
Exactly. Then consistent configuration files across all projects.
To avoid those compatibility headaches.
Exactly. And finally, making sure their build process was deterministic.
Deterministic, meaning?
Predictable. Every time you build, you get the same result.
Consistency is key. But with that much code, I'm guessing there were still challenges.
Oh, for sure. Build times were a big one, even with everything optimized.
Right, because every minute counts at that scale.
They realized traditional build systems just wouldn't cut it.
So what did they do?
They had to find a way to distribute the build process across multiple machines.
So like parallel processing.
Exactly. It's the only way to handle that volume of code.
Smart. So they really committed to making TypeScript work for them, not the other way around.
Exactly. And one interesting thing they did was inline types from dependencies.
Okay, back up a bit. Inlining types. Explain it like I'm 5.
Imagine you have a giant Lego set.
Okay, I'm following.
But the instructions are scattered everywhere.
That's the worst.
Right. That's kind of what it's like working with external libraries sometimes.
So inlining types brings all those instructions together.
Yes. Makes everything easier to find, understand, and use.
Developer happiness achieved. But before we get lost in the TypeScript weeds, let's zoom out.
Back to the monorepo, you mean?
Yes. We've seen Zuver, we've seen Bloomberg, both successful, but is this the answer for everyone?
That's the thing, right? It's not a magic bullet.
Right. Just because it worked for Google doesn't mean it'll work for everyone.
It has huge EE advantages, don't get me wrong. Code sharing, dependency management, better tooling.
But there's always a but.
But it needs the right environment. You need the tools, the processes, the collaborative culture.
Otherwise, it can backfire spectacularly.
Oh, yeah. Instead of a well-oiled machine, you get chaos.
Right. Build issues, merge conflicts, everyone's unhappy.
The opposite of what you want.
Okay, so monorepos, powerful but not for the faint of heart. Now, you mentioned something earlier about broader trends.
Oh, yeah. There are definitely some interesting patterns emerging.
Like what?
Design systems, for example. They're becoming huge EE, especially alongside monorepos.
Design systems. Okay, for those of us who haven't jumped on that train yet.
It's basically a centralized library of UI components, guidelines, coding standards.
So everything looks and feels consistent.
Exactly. One source of truth for your design language.
And how does this tie into the monorepo?
Well, the monorepo provides the perfect environment for it.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
All your code's in one place, so sharing and reusing those components is a breeze.
Makes sense. Any examples from our case studies?
Notion's marketing site is a perfect example.
Right. They went all in on Next.js.
And their design system was key to that migration.
Tell me more.
They built a custom design system using Style.jsx, which is a CSS.NJS library.
Okay, so they're able to really tailor it to their needs.
Exactly. And the benefits were huge. Visual consistency across the whole site.
So branding is on point.
And development became much smoother. Developers could build new features faster.
Because they're not reinventing the wheel every time.
Precisely. But it wasn't just the monorepo, right? They also had great documentation, clear guidelines.
So it's the whole package, the tools, the processes, the people.
It's all connected. You can't just throw a monorepo at a problem and expect it to magically work.
Right. It's about creating the right environment for success.
Exactly. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Monorepos, design systems, the whole shebang.
We have. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, any parting words of wisdom?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. There's no silver bullet.
I like that. No magic solutions.
It's about finding what works for you, your team, your project.
And being open to adapting and evolving along the way.
Exactly.
All right, so we've talked about speed, accessibility, developer experience, monorepos, the works. But you know we always save the best for last.
The grand finale. And believe me, these last few performance stories, they're juicy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. Who are we talking about?
Let's start with Tinder.
Tinder, okay, interesting. What'd they do?
So their challenge was optimizing their PWA, their progressive web app.
Right.
For a global audience.
Right.
Which means all kinds of different connections.
Makes sense, yeah.
From super fast Wi-Fi to, like, spotty 3G.
Oh, yeah, that's tricky. So how do you even begin to tackle that?
They use something called adaptive loading.
Adaptive loading, okay. So the app kind of adjusts itself.
Exactly. It's like a chameleon. If you've got a great connection, Tinder goes all out, preloading everything for that super smooth experience.
Makes sense.
But if you're on a slower connection, it dials it back, focuses on the essentials, conserves data.
Smart. So it's like it knows what you need before you do.
That's the idea. They use the Network Information API to actually detect your connection type.
Wow, fancy.
And they use something called progressive image loading too. So basically they send multiple versions of the same image, different resolutions, and the browser picks the best one based on your connection.
So you always get the best possible quality, but without slowing things down.
Exactly. It's all about that balance.
Very cool. Okay, what's next on our performance hit list?
Yahoo. Japan. They tackled something that drives users crazy.
Which is?
Cumulative layout shift. CLS.
CLS, okay. Refresh my memory.
You know when you're reading an article and suddenly the text jumps around?
Oh, yeah, the worst. It's like impossible to read.
Exactly. That's CLS.
Yeah.
And it was killing their news site.
Because who wants to read a jumping article?
Right, so they went on a mission to fix it.
I'm in suspense. How'd they do it?
Well, first, they had to figure out what was causing it.
Right. Gotta diagnose the problem.
Often, it's images without dimensions, or dynamically injected content.
Okay, so like things that change the page layout unexpectedly.
Exactly. And one of their solutions was pretty clever. Aspect ratio boxes.
Aspect ratio box. Okay, I'm listening.
It's like, imagine you're hanging pictures on a wall.
Okay, I'm with you.
You wouldn't just start hammering nails randomly, would you?
No way. I'd measure first, make sure there's enough space.
Exactly. That's what aspect ratio boxes do for images on a web page.
So before the image loads, it already knows how much space to reserve.
Exactly. That way, the text below doesn't jump around when the image pops in.
So no more jump scares for your content.
Precisely. And it worked wonders for Yahoo Japan. They saw a 98% decrease in bad CLS scores.
Wow, that's huge.
And their engagement metrics went up too. People were actually reading the article.
Because they could. That's amazing. Okay, last but not least, we have eBay.
eBay, the e-commerce giant. They're serious about speed.
I bet. They've got to be, right? With so much competition.
They actually launched a whole speed initiative across the company.
Okay, so it's not just a tech team thing, it's a company culture thing.
Exactly. Everyone's on board with making things faster.
So how'd they do it? What's their secret sauce?
They took a holistic approach. Reduced page weight, optimized caching, streamlined rendering.
Give me some specifics.
Well, for one, they standardized on the WebP image format.
WebP? Okay. Is that like a super image format?
Pretty much. It gives you better compression than JPEG or PNG, but without sacrificing quality.
So smaller images, faster loading times.
Exactly. Especially important for a site like eBay with tons of images.
Right. Makes sense. What else?
They do a lot of predictive prefetching.
Okay, so like they know what I want before I want it.
Basically. Like, say you're browsing search results and you're about to click on something.
Yeah.
eBay has probably already preloaded that product page in the background.
No way! That's wild. How is that even possible?
It's all about anticipating user behavior.
Right, and with all the data they have, they can probably predict that pretty accurately.
Exactly. They also optimize their mobile parsing, which is like the technical nitty-gritty.
Okay, so they really went deep.
Oh yeah, they left no stone unturned. And the results speak for themselves.
I bet. So faster loading times, happier users, more sales.
That's the idea. They prove that performance is not just a technical thing, it's a business thing.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have. Performance, accessibility, developer experience, the whole 9 yards.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is this. Building great web experiences, it's a journey.
Not a destination.
Exactly. It's about constantly learning, experimenting, adapting.
And never giving up on making things better.
Exactly. Because the web is always changing, and we have to change with it.
Well said. So there you have it. A crash course in scaling web applications.
From some of the best in the business.
We hope you've enjoyed the ride. Until next time.